hair is looking very damaged on this side today. I need to get a haircut anyway. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to go over the 20 books that I read in February. Now let me tell you, February, it was a whirlwind of a ride and I am very glad that it's over. But March is my birthday month, I'm turning 27, so hopefully better things are on the horizon. Listen, if you don't know already, I lost pretty much all of my video footage and documents on my computer through a series of very unfortunate events. So I was in the middle of, I literally only had one more clip, just like the closing clip to edit, and that is my headphone. No, thank you. Literally just the closing clip to edit and film and upload for a month-long video that I had filmed. It was like 2.5 hours long. It was me finishing out and reading like 15 different books in series, like trying to catch up on series. It's all gone. I had almost 2 terabytes of data. So you'll watch me slowly descend into madness in an upcoming video where I was also filming while all of this was happening. I just wasn't putting anything on my computer because I was afraid to even just look at my computer. That is the tragic news. However, that does mean that most of these books you won't have heard me talk about yet, even though I have talked about them at length in front of the camera. So at least I have this wrap up here where I can talk to you about them, share my thoughts. Moving forward into March, it's gotta be better vibes. The month of February, when it comes to my reading, also had some of like my biggest wins and biggest disappointments thus far. I got my stack here. Let's go ahead and get into it. In January, I read the 5th season, which if you had seen that, that is going on my favorite books of all time list. Absolutely incredible. So I was ready to dive into finishing that trilogy. So I read both the Obelisk Gate and the Stone Sky in February. Look at this. Do we see this, tabs? Love to see it. I guess for most people, the Obelisk Gate was like the slower one and then the Stone Sky was their favorite. But for me, I still think the 5th season is my absolute favorite. Then the Obelisk Gate, then the Stone Sky. But I would absolutely recommend this series to like anyone, especially if you are a fan of fantasy. This is brilliant. Unbelievably incredible. I cried in all 3 books. Sometimes I just cried from like how amazing it was. The character and the world development that N.K. Jemisin is able to do, I just don't even understand how their mind works. I couldn't even begin to like scratch the surface. So the 5th season is kind of post-apocalyptic, kind of fantasy, kind of a story about womanhood and family and grief and humanity and what it means to be human and the importance of all kinds of love, not just relationship love, but I gave the 5th season 5 stars, the Obelisk Gate 5 stars, and then I think I gave the Stone Sky 4 or 4.5 stars. It's not that objectively this was less than the other 2, it's just that I think this was more plot based and I almost wanted like 200 more pages from this. This was like one of the shortest, I think it is the shortest book of the trilogy, and I wish that it had been like twice as long as the other ones, and I would have loved every single minute of it. The amount that what we thought we knew changed, how much the world and what we thought was going on just absolutely expanded and imploded and exploded. Did all of the things in this book incredible, but for me it just felt a little bit too much in too short of a time. I would have preferred to sit in it for just a little bit longer. That being said, the series as a whole, 5 stars. And I actually think upon reread, this could end up being a 5 star now that I know where it's going. And I could like appreciate that a little bit more, because up until like the 60 pages left in the book, I still had no idea what was gonna happen. No idea. I already can't wait to reread this trilogy, so absolutely recommend. Next up, I read the 3rd book in the Pinch of Magic series. This is a middle grade fantasy series that follows 3 sisters, and if you just want something whimsical and that will just make your heart so happy, this series is incredible. The Winterstone sisters are so well done. Each character is incredibly unique. I think maybe I talked about this in my January wrap up too. Maybe I read the 2nd book in January. But in A Tangle of Spells, we're actually following as the Winterstone sisters are checking out this new home in this new town, and something is amiss. There are possibly witches, possibly more magic or a different kind of magic than they've ever come across before, but the people in the town don't like to talk about that, and there's just this like unsettling feeling happening with their new home and the new town and the new people that are in it that the girls have to go explore. They end up finding a secret room in their new house, and that brings about a lot of questions that they've got to go answer. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I think it's my least favorite of the 3 so far. There's a 4th one and then I think that it's a completed series, but it's still so well done. And if you like middle grade fantasy, definitely recommend the series. Another video that I filmed that will never see the light of day was reading different KU books or Kindle Unlimited books. And the first one that I read this month was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is part of the Murderbot series of novellas. They're very short. I think this was like 100 pages, maybe even a little bit less than 100 pages. But we are following Murderbot, but it's not at all the vibes that you would think that it would be based off of that title. The best part about this book for me was how relatable Murderbot was. That was definitely my favorite part of this, but typically I'm not like super in love with like the more light-hearted adult fantasy sci-fi kind of vibes. I can like them and there's a time and place for them in my reading, but they don't usually like blow me out of the water as much as some of like the darker fantasy does. So this for me was a 3-star, but I'm actually really excited that I started this series because I believe most of it is on Kindle Unlimited and I could get the audiobooks on Scribd. So I think whenever I'm feeling like I'm in a reading slump and I just need to get through something fast, this is gonna be a good one. It's hard to talk about the plot because it's a novella and it's such a short novella that saying anything else I feel like would give it away. It's an extremely well-loved series, so if that sounds like something that you're interested in, definitely pick it up. I also feel like maybe it's a TV show. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so. So you could also just watch the TV show. Then I picked up my girl, Katie Robert, and Wicked Beauty. I actually got this from the library on ebook and audiobook. Listen, it doesn't make sense that I love the series and Katie Roberts' writing so much, but something about it just works perfectly for me. I ended up reading Neon Gods back in 2021. It was one of the first books that I had read in a really long time, and I got that recommendation off of like, Book Talk before I was really into Book Talk or knew what Book Talk was. And this was back before I really like rediscovered my love of reading, and that book sucked me in. It's a Hades and Persephone retelling. I think people talk about it like it's fantasy romance, but when I tell you that the fantasy is like this much, it's mainly just smutty romance. But listen, I don't know if it's just the language that she uses or the way that she writes her characters and their interactions, but it works for me. I never thought that I would say this, but I actually think that Wicked Beauty might end up topping Neon Gods as my favorite. There's 3 in the series that I have read so far. Wicked Beauty follows Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. And I loved this book so much. If you are into the very smutty, spicy, steamy fantasy romance kind of vibes and you're okay with there not really being much fantasy, but you love mostly the like interactions between the love interests, and you haven't already checked out Katie Robert yet, check her out. So yeah, definitely 5 stars on Wicked Beauty. Next, I read Concrete Rose, which is the prequel to The Hate U Give. In The Hate U Give, we follow Star, who is a black teenager, and one night, one of her like childhood friends ends up driving her home from a party. They get pulled over, and he gets shot and killed by the police. And we follow her as she has to kind of be the spokesperson for getting justice for her friend Khalil. And in that book, her dad plays a pretty big role in it, and this is following her dad as he is like her age. So we're flashing back into time, and oh my god. We get to follow Maverick as he's finding out when he's like 16, 17 that he's a dad. And we get to watch as he really struggles with this because he wants to be able to make enough money to support himself and his child and to help out with his mom. And his dad was really high up in one of the local gangs called the King Lords, so he could find his place there, but he's trying not to get sucked into all of that, but also the money that he could be making from selling drugs is so much more and provides a lot more financial stability than like working at his local neighborhood grocery store. And he's really struggling with like what to do and how to make ends meet and how to go to high school but also be a dad. But the love that he has for his kids, absolutely beautiful and incredible. And getting to watch him after you've already seen him as an adult and like as Star's dad in The Hate U Give, being able to flash back and see kind of where he came from and what he struggled with just made me want to reread The Hate U Give again. Absolutely 5 stars. Totally recommend. Now let's get into some books from a vlog that you actually would have seen, and that was me at a cabin reading horror books alone. This was so much fun. It was completely impromptu and I had a blast, but let me tell you, there was a wide range of feelings that I had for the books that I read. Now, since you will have already seen the video on these, I won't go too in depth on them, and since they are all novellas, there's not a lot that I could say about them without giving things away, but I will go over my thoughts on them really quickly. I was holding all of these up. I didn't read this one. Or this one. I was just holding up all of my library books, evidently. But I did read another one that is not here because I read it on Kindle Unlimited, which I guess we can talk about first, and that is Nothing But Blackened Teeth. Now let me tell you, I see this book being talked about a lot on horror novella book videos, but I think it's one of those that everyone thinks, like in their head, they know that they've seen it, they recognize the cover, so then we think we saw it on booktube recommendations, when in reality, most of the people who read it absolutely hate it. For me, it was not a huge win, but I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, which was more than I thought that I was gonna give it. It's pitched as a haunted house, but I think that that's the tricky part, is because if you're going into it looking for like a horror novella haunted house kind of read, that's not quite it, and I think that's why you could be disappointed. It's also just a little bit confusing, and I totally understand why people don't love that and why they're disappointed by it, but I was pleasantly surprised considering going into it. I thought that there was pretty much a guarantee that I was gonna hate it. The one that did not work for me at all was The Girl in the Video. Now, in its defense, I didn't know anything about this. I just went to the library and picked up any like horror novella that I could find, and this one was very short, and it was pitched as like a horror book for the iPhone generation. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fantastic. But it ended up just feeling like one of those horror stories that you read on like a link someone shared on Facebook that's like, oh my God, this is so creepy, check it out. Where it was like nothing but the author trying to shock you just for shock value. And I want more than that in my horror novellas. I want it to be saying something, and I felt like this book wasn't saying anything. He is a very like popular podcaster, and I think that the publisher just wanted to, you know, make a quick buck. No, didn't like this one. 1 star. And actually it might be my only 1 star of the month. I might have lied. I did have 2 5-star wins from that vlog, which was You Should Have Left and Final Girls. Final Girls is by Mira Grant, which is Shauna Maguire. Now, I'm super lucky that my library has this book because this is like a special edition and I can't find a copy for myself anywhere. Well, I can, but it's like 60 or 70 bucks. I don't think that like they make print versions of this anymore. But this was kind of sci-fi, kind of fantasy, set in the future when there's this new technology. It's like a VR pod that you can go into that this one company has invented that gives you nightmares to try to kind of heal your relationships with people. You like go through really traumatic events with people to heal that relationship, and it's very controversial, obviously. But our main girl is going there to study this because she's a journalist and she wants to know if it's like a bunch of bullshit. This was so good. This one is also one that I guess a lot of people don't like very much, and I understand why, because You Should Have Left is about this man who is going to this like kind of Airbnb type thing, I believe in Germany, yes, with his wife and their child. And this whole thing is told in as if you're reading like his journal, like literally reading his journal. So sometimes he'll be writing about the like screenplay that he's writing. Sometimes he'll be talking about his wife. Sometimes he'll be talking about the house, and it'll kind of blend into each other because he'll stop writing in the middle of sentences and then it'll go on. So for example, it says, if only we didn't get on each other's nerves so much. Get away while, and then it stops and moves to December 3rd, like the next entry, because he couldn't finish that sentence. But I loved the disjointed aspect of it because he was feeling so confused in this house, and as weird things are starting to happen in this house, and the townspeople are acting weird about them staying there. So the fact that he was so confused and then you felt really disjointed and confused, I loved this so much. And apparently it's a movie that also everyone else hates, but I feel like I need to watch it. I'm gonna be lower on the camera for a second because I gotta stretch out my legs. My feet were falling asleep. The last novella I read in that vlog was Crossroads. I hear about this all of the time. If I ever watch a video on like horror novella recommendations, Crossroads it is. This is one of the saddest, most heartbreaking books I've ever read in my entire life. So know that going into it. It's about a mom whose son died in a car crash, and she goes to visit his, like the site of where he passed away, and accidentally spills some blood, and then she starts seeing and hearing her son. And everything just kind of spirals from there. This is such an amazing look at grief and the grief of being a mother. I feel like if you were a mom, this would hit even harder. And this at times was hard for me to read, so keep that in mind, but otherwise brilliantly well done. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Then I read the second book in the second era of Mistborn, which is Shadows of Self. I always get this mixed up. I can never remember if it's Bands of Morning or Shadows of Self. This one is Shadows of Self. The third one is Bands of Morning. Mistborn Era 1, the original trilogy, is my favorite series of all time. And this series follows that same world, but like a few hundred years in the future. And And that's really cool because in this world, the magic system is based off of metals, and some people can use the powers of certain metals to have specific abilities. So because we're in the future, this series is like more of a Western-y vibe because they have like guns and trains and motor cars and things like that. So because this magic system is based off of metals, that really changes how people use their magic and then also how people use like guns and their weapons. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I still feel like this is so good. Everything that we knew grew so much, and there started to be so many ties back to what happened in that first trilogy that I was like, brilliant. Brandon Sanderson's mind and world and characters are just incredible. And this was a really fast read for me. It was exactly what I needed at the time. And I do think once I end up finishing out the series, this could end up being a 5-star. It's just that these are a little bit, because they have that more like Western-y vibe, they're a little bit more lighthearted and like funny. Like Wax and Wayne are 2 main characters. They've got like a good banter to them. When I first talked about this in the video, that won't be lost forever. I'm just gonna keep bringing that up because I'm still mourning. I just had to come to terms with it yesterday, okay? But hear me out, okay? If you're a fan of Supernatural, I would not say that this is like Supernatural, but it is like the relationship and dynamic between Sam and Dean, especially within like those first few series where there's some dark things going on, but there's still that humor in their relationship, like as brothers. That's what Wax and Wayne remind me of in these books. So if you like that and you miss that kind of vibe, you gotta read Mistborn Era 1, but I would recommend that anyway. But that's what this kind of reminds me of. 4 stars, overall a success. A book that was a surprising, kind of surprising, well, a lot of things about it were surprising, but it was a huge win for me. Might end up competing for one of my favorite books of the year, was Alone with You in the Ether. When is that today? Oh my god, I'm so glad that I remembered that. I have to set an alarm. Katie's book club talk on this book is today. Rewinding. Such a huge win for me was Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. I actually don't have it with me because I already gave it to my mom, because the second I finished it, I was like, you need to read this. Now, I went into this thinking that it was a fantasy standalone. It's not a fantasy. I thought it was fantasy because Olivia Blake wrote the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox. I read the Atlas Paradox this year. It's the sequel. Absolutely loved it. 5 stars. Gonna be one of my favorite books of the year. And I love the way that she writes characters in her prose. I am just in love with Olivia Blake's writing. And this really sealed that in for me, especially since I thought it was a fantasy and then it wasn't. It's a love story. This book follows 2 people who meet in a museum and agree to have 6 conversations with each other. They are 2, what I would describe as like unlikable characters, or kind of unlikable. They're very nuanced. They don't always make good decisions. Their relationship isn't always healthy, but you still end up rooting for them. At least I did. Like, you still end up wanting what's best for them and wanting them to have a healthy relationship. And I just wanted to like highlight that whole book. The reason I gave it to my mom was because we went to breakfast together and I pulled it out of my purse and we were just reading the parts that I had highlighted, and she loved it so much that I was like, please take it and love it so we can talk about it, because I almost never read books that my mom would like. We have 2 very different styles of reading. So the fact that it worked for me and she was also loving the like parts that she was reading, I feel like says a lot. I will say I could understand why people would think that this is pretentious. Probably is, but it worked. And I am so excited about this because historically contemporary romance does not work for me, and I want it to so badly. So the fact that I unknowingly found a 5-star, possibly favorite of the year contemporary romance, we love to see it. For this next book, we're bringing back the incredible covers of the Hidden Legacy series. The second in the series, White Hot. Take a look. Wow. Incredible. You would think that this entire book is smut. It's not. There's like barely any. This is an urban fantasy that I love, and it's actually not the relationship that I love the most, although now the relationship is growing on me. I liked it in Burn For Me. I'm starting to like the relationship a little bit more now as it's grown, but really what gets me in here is the relationship between our main girl, Nevada, and her family. Their dynamic is incredible, and Nevada is a fucking badass. You've got to be fucking kidding me. Someone is moving a tank. And I don't mean that as like an exaggeration. There's a literal military base right there, right across the street. A little street, it's not a big street. I wake up to tanks every morning. If there's ever an apocalypse, we ride at dawn. I typically don't love urban fantasies, but the way that they've set up this magic system and the characters, I love it. This was a 4-star for me. I will say I messed up a little bit because about halfway through it, I ended up listening to the audiobook despite the fact that the audiobook wasn't my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of the southern accents that the audiobook narrator uses, but I was shopping at Barnes & Noble on Valentine's Day and I wanted something to listen to, but then I kept kind of getting lost in my head. Oh, on top of everything else that happened in February, also the pharmacy has been out of my medication and they were like out for like weeks. So they put me on a different ADHD medication that I thought I was sick. I was nauseous, running a fever. You know when you literally can't get out of bed because like walking just completely exhausts you? That's how I was for 5 days because I thought I was sick. No, it was the medicine. I had no idea that that could even happen. So shout out to my fellow Adderall people because there is a shortage and it has been a struggle. So I've been without my medication, and at the time I was without my medication. So my thoughts tend to wander. It's a little bit harder for me to focus. So I would have this playing on the background. I ended up having to re-listen to chapter 7 like 4 times. And I know that I got some of the people confused because I'm already so bad with characters and their names, especially if I don't see them written down. And there were a lot of different characters to remember. The ways that we start kind of exploring the houses and the politics in this world. It's like set in our world in Texas in the future where magic now exists, but only some people have magic. And there's these houses which are like families of primes that are like the tippy top most powerful people of their kind of magic. And we're starting to get a really good look into the politics between the houses, but it was hard for me to remember who was who. This could have been a 5-star had I not done that, but either way it was still a 4-star. It was really good and I've already started continuing on in the series. Please just ignore the covers. I don't think they represent the story or the characters at all. Okay, for this next one, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I only read it for this local book club that I go to. I always read the books because I love the book club itself, even though most of the books I end up not liking. I totally understand that's because just some of the like more popular tropes just don't vibe with me. So this month was smutty books and we read That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, and I don't want my opinions of that book to sway anyone from reading it because I know that it's like not the book, it's me. It's just I would have never picked up that book to begin with, and even if I had, I probably would have read a few pages and then realized that it's just not the book for me and then put it down. So I didn't rate it on Goodreads. I don't really want to rate it, but I wanted to mention it here because it was a book that I read and I know that it has so many amazing reviews and people love it all the time, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited and you want like over-the-top smutty fantasy romance, then definitely consider checking this out. See if it's for you. Either way, it's like really short, so it's only gonna take you a couple of hours to read, and I know that she has like spin-offs in this series already out and then maybe some coming soon as well. Next one, Finley Donovan Jumps the Gun. I read this because it is the Literally Dead book club for the month of February. Live show happening here in a few days in March. And I was nervous. I will admit, I loved the first book in the Finley Donovan series, hated the second book, but that's because I hated the entire premise of the second book. Like, had I known what it was going into it, I probably wouldn't have even read it because I could have told you that I didn't care. But the premise of this one was already set up for more success in my opinion. This series follows Finley Donovan, who is a mom, and one day she is sitting at a Panera talking to her literary agent because she's a book writer and talking about like the premise of her next book. Someone overhears her in another booth and thinks that she's an assassin. So she slips her a note and she's like, hey, I will pay you to my husband. And then Finley Donovan kind of gets wrapped up in that. It is hilarious and over the top and so much fun. She has her sidekick Vero, who was her nanny but now is like in the midst of all these shenanigans with her. The first one I gave 5 stars, absolutely had a fantastic time. So this one was kind of like, honestly for me, I probably wouldn't have even picked this up had it not been for the fact that it was a Literally Dead book club pick. And it was kind of deciding for me whether I was going to continue on in the series or not. But I'm happy to report this was a 4-star. I still think the first one is the best one for me, but the premise of this one was just already better. We got to see more of those like funny shenanigans with Vero and Finley. They end up at the Citizens Police Academy when they should probably be like staying away from the cops and minding their own business. But I really loved it. The audiobooks for this, if you were gonna choose between one or the other, I would really recommend the audiobooks, but I really like this kind of cozy mystery vibe for audiobooks. I feel like they're the best ones to read. In last month's video of Bookish Bumble building my TBR, I picked Illumicrate. Like I needed to read a book that I have gotten from Illumicrate. So I read The Book Eaters. This premise is so cool. It is set in our world, but in a future, kind of, just in a version of our world where there are certain people who eat books instead of food, and that's how they live. But then also whenever they eat them, they like consume, they consume the knowledge of them. Except there are also people who, instead of eating books, they're mind eaters, and they eat human minds for sustenance instead. And our main woman is a book eater, and she's also a mom, but her son is a mind eater. And we start off following her as she's kind of struggling with balancing trying to keep her son alive, but also knowing what she has to do to keep her son alive. But this doesn't go in the direction you think it would. This is more of like a cult book, because we get flashes back to her in her childhood, and the book eaters, like the families, they really functioned like a patriarchal cult. And there was a lot of things that just ended up not working for me in this book. Overall, I ended up giving it a 3-star, maybe 3.5, but I would say it's probably a 3 now thinking about it. I was just so excited for the premise of this, and I felt like the execution of it got a little bit lost and muddled in there. For the next one, I finally did it. I read Spy Family. This was my first manga ever, and I literally just bought this because of Katie's recommendation, but I was a little bit intimidated by it. This was so wholesome. This brought just like so much joy to my heart. And I'd heard that it would, and people were correct. So we follow our main dude who's a spy, and he is on a mission that requires him to have a family. So he ends up going to this orphanage, finds his daughter, not knowing that she's a telepath. Anya, she's so cute. I love her so much. And then he has to find a wife, and she ends up being an assassin, but she doesn't know that he's a spy, and he doesn't know that she's an assassin. But their daughter knows because the daughter is a telepath. And they're all a fake family, but it's so cute and wholesome and fun. Loved it. And I'm so excited that I started this series because I feel like this is going to be a good one to return to when I'm feeling like I'm in a reading slump and I just need something to keep pushing me forward. I can come back to this. I ended up giving this 4 stars, but I definitely think in the future books could be 5 stars, and this is one that if you're already into manga or you're wanting to get into manga, I would definitely recommend. Take that with a grain of salt though, because this is the only manga I've ever read. I'm not well versed in it. But I know that like, I literally had never heard a bad thing about it ever. I hadn't even heard a like mediocre thing about it. I'd heard nothing but fantastic reviews. Now, this next one. This was probably the biggest disappointment of the month, and that was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Now listen, I went into this with the best of intentions. I thought everyone loved this. Then I ended up reading some Goodreads reviews after I was like 100 pages in, and I was like, what is happening? And then I realized that I was mistaken. I think The Night Circus is the one by her that people really love, and then people are very like on the fence one way or the other about this one. It's hard for me to even tell you what this book is about because like I read it and do I even know what it's about? It starts off with our main boy Zachary, and he ends up finding a book that has a story of something that has happened to him in his life inside of it. And then we kind of follow that, but then interspersed between the stories of like Zachary and what's happening to him as like he discovers this underground library and the Starless Sea, but like what is the Starless Sea? We don't know. There's also these like little stories / fairy tales, and I would say that this is a book about stories. And I think that if you're someone who loves literature, loves diving into symbolism and both like the meanings behind things, you might really love this. But when I tell you, I normally am okay with there being no plot. Alone with You in the Ether, I can say there's relatively little plot in that book. Absolutely loved it. Same thing with the Atlas Paradox. But the way that there was no plot in this one, it just didn't make sense to me. And everyone describes her writing as being beautiful, and I was just like, I wanted so many good things from this, and I wanted so much more, and I did my best. Like, I started off reading the physical version of this, but I had the UK edition, and listen, shout out to everyone in the UK. I don't know how you hold those paperbacks. It sounds so stupid, but when I tell you for days afterward, my wrist hurt so much trying to hold that book. I couldn't do it, so I ended up buying, I already had the physical version. I wasn't liking it that much. I ended up buying the ebook version of it, and I'm actually really glad that I did because the ebook allowed me to go back and like look up things because I was getting really confused. Erin Morgenstern expects that you're going to remember these like little things. I think if you reread this book, you would be able to catch up, like, you know, you'd be able to catch on to what was happening a little bit better, but like I don't care enough to reread. But I think overall, the difference between why I love books like The Atlas Paradox that have no plot and why this one I didn't like is the characters. I'm sorry, but there was what was happening with those characters? Nothing happened. Like, there was no character growth. I didn't care about Zachary at all. And you're supposed to. The love story? Don't even get me started on that. Okay, it wasn't even insta-love. It was just like, you two have barely ever interacted ever. And I'm supposed to believe this? No. So I didn't care enough about Zachary to overcome the fact that there wasn't a plot. And I didn't like the writing enough to overcome the fact that there wasn't a plot. But I know that this is like one of Megan from Books with Meg's favorite books of all time. I also know that Hannah from A Clockwork Reader absolutely loves this book too. So I think it is one of those books that you are either going to really love or really hate. I only had like 50 pages left in the book and I still had no idea what I was going to rate it because it all came down to like, was all of this worth it in the end? No. So I ended up giving it 1.5 stars. Last but not least, we have Fortune, Fire, and Stars, and I actually just got done reading this book like 10 minutes before I sat down to film this video. Now, this one also came off of my Bookish Bumble TBR. I picked this book up at the dollar store. Like when I first got started into reading, and I was just picking up pretty books, and then I was like, well, it's $1, why would I not get it? Not having like any idea what it is about. I was actually loving this book, or like really vibing with it, for like the first half, and then it just quickly went downhill from there. I ended up skimming the last like 70 pages of this book because I just realized that I didn't care. Nothing happened in this. Seems to be a theme, doesn't it? But normally that works for me. This is very slow paced, but it's also a YA fantasy, which is a weird vibe to have in YA fantasy because it wasn't fleshed out well enough to feel like the nothing happening was purposeful and was leading up to something. This was another example of a quest story where people are just walking and talking and eating and sleeping, and then there's a scuffle, and then they do it all over again, over and over. But then toward the end, there was like this whole trial thing that happened in like 7 pages, and I was like, why was that not the book? Like, you could have expanded those trials to be like at least half of this book, cut out some of the traveling, and then something would have happened, and then maybe I would have felt like the stakes were higher. I also guessed the major plot twist in this from like page 10. So the like cliffhanger and everything that this was leading up to, I was like, yeah, okay. But that is a personal preference kind of thing. I would be really interested in reading an adult book by this author. I just don't think her YA really jives with me. Also, this cover doesn't match the vibes. This was like very slow paced, kind of like Enchantment of Ravens vibes. This gives me like big fighter scene action. I haven't quite had enough time to like really think through my rating on this, but I would say it's probably at like a 2-star. Maybe 2.5. So that is it for the 20 books that I read in February. If you stuck around this long, leave me a little bee emoji down below in honor of the cover of what I would consider to be my favorite book this month, which was Alone with You in the Ether. Did I say bunny or bee? Bee, right? Bee. Yeah, a bee. Bzz, bee emoji. Okay, we're on the same page here? I'm pretty sure I said bee. Editing Lexa, let us know. Oh, I'm sure you did. Editing Lexa loves filming Lexa so much. Especially when I don't have access to my medication. Even better. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!